Hello and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk a bit about asylum. Now, asylum by itself is a very large subject, and honestly, I could probably do 30 videos on asylum if I broke down each individual element and discussed in detail each element, which I may do. Okay, I mean, come back 2 years from now, there's probably going to be another 30 videos, give or take, on the various parts of asylum. However, I'd like to do a generalized asylum video so you get an idea of what asylum is, how it might apply to you or to somebody you know, what the general elements are, and what basically is required in order to do asylum. Now given that, keep in mind that every case that says you can't do it this way, there's probably another case that says you can do it this way. So asylum is very much open as far as being able to try to make a good asylum case and trying to win the asylum. And one thing right off the bat, asylum is not necessarily automatically granted or automatically denied depending what country you're from. Over the last 20 years, I've had people come into my office and they say, well, I'm from Mexico, so I don't qualify for asylum. Well, that's not true. Of course, I need to ask them what the basis is for what they think they qualify for asylum, what the facts are in their particular case. By the same token, let's say they come from Egypt and they change religions. It's not automatic that they're going to get asylum in that case. Again, asylum must be proven, the elements must be shown, and the documents and supporting evidence must be presented. So given that, it does create the necessity to at least know essentially what it is you need to present. Now, for asylum, that is basically when a person comes in to the United States, and once they're here, they essentially don't want to go back to their home country because they have the elements or because they fear persecution in their home country, and they seek asylum in the United States, meaning they basically want to go through the procedure and ask the United States government to grant them the ability to stay here in the United States without being returned back to their home country for fear of persecution or because of past persecution, whichever that may be. So that's the basic elements of asylum. So if you come into the United States and you want to apply for asylum, then of course at the point of entry, at the border, what you have to do is you have to pass most of the time a credible, fair interview. You have to pass it. So what's going to happen is if you come into the United States and either you don't have valid documents, you have fake documents, you get caught, you are using someone else's documents, whatever it is, the law says if you have a well-founded fear persecution, then you will not be returned to your country at that time, and you will be placed into removal proceedings in order to allow you to apply for asylum. So there's different ways of applying for asylum, and this is one way. And this is the way of coming into the U.S. and getting that credible fear interview out of the way. So this law came about more or less in 1996, and what happens is it really relies on one person to determine whether you have a credible fear or not. And if that person determines that you do, then you're in, and then you can really apply. If the person determines that you don't have the credible fear, you're going to be returned to your home country. So based upon that, what my firm does is if I know somebody's coming into the U.S. and they are going to be doing this, that they're going to be claiming that they have a credible fear to return, I can prepare ahead of time the credible fear packet to show the jurisdiction why they're allowed the credible fear interview, and to make it so that it's a nice convincing story, of course, with the facts. And then also, most of the time, I am allowed as the attorney to be present during the credible fear interview, either telephonically or in person. Because when it comes right down to it, it is a bit unfair. It's one-sided that one person can just make this decision, and you have to ask yourself, how much training does the person have who's going to be doing the credible fear interview? How many has he or she done? I have found in the past a lot of them are fair, but I've also found sometimes that sometimes for whatever reason the person conducting the credible fear interview has 3 months of experience, and that doesn't bode well with someone whose life is in the hanging and doesn't want to go back to their home country because of persecution. So that's one way, and you have to apply and get over that hump in order to go forward. Now, another way is, let's say you happen to get here legally, visitor visa, student visa, whatever it happens to be, you're here legally. Now, if you want then to apply within 1 year of coming to the U.S., and this is important, the law says you must apply for asylum within 1 year of coming to the U.S., or you have to show extraordinary circumstances as to why you did not apply in that year. So the basic procedure in that respect is you're going to affirmatively apply for asylum, and in this case you don't need to pass the credible fear interview because you made it to the United States legally and you're in. Okay, remember, the credible fear interview is when you're at the port of entry, and basically they're going to turn you around, or they're going to let you into removal proceedings depending on what you prove to them. So this one, you're already in the country. Here you would apply affirmatively for asylum at the asylum office in the jurisdiction where you live, and it doesn't go to court yet. It goes, ultimately to the asylum office, and it actually moves fairly quickly. So, all the documents are prepared, the exhibits, declarations, affidavits, it's submitted, and then you will get an interview with the asylum officer, who will then decide whether to grant or deny your asylum. And technically it's not a denial, okay, that's what they say. But what happens is, if you go to the interview and they don't want to approve it, they then refer the case to immigration court. And it is referred to immigration court if you are out of status. Okay, so if you're out of status, then you essentially get your first shot at the asylum officer, the asylum office, and then you then get to go to removal proceedings to try to convince the judge that you should be granted asylum. And of course that can be appealed up and up. If it gets denied, it can go to the circuit courts, and ultimately, depending on the issue, it can go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, given this particular avenue, you want to make sure that your asylum packet is prepared in the best manner possible. Now, obviously, you're not going to have a declaration from some general that if you step foot back on the country, they're going to shoot you dead. Okay, the evidence is never there like that. So it's a matter of pulling in. If you have past persecution, pulling in the experiences, the evidence, what you can, and getting declarations. A lot of times when I'm doing an asylum, I'll get a expert testimony from someone who's very familiar with the region and testifies whether the story is true, whether it could happen, whether there is persecution. When you're in front of the asylum officer, your actual arguments are limited a bit, in that you're basically at a desk, and you're on one side, the officer's on the other, and if you have an attorney with you, which you should, the attorney's right beside you. And it doesn't have the formality of a trial and cross-examination and so forth. I mean, you do get an opportunity to present your case, but at least the last time I had looked, the essential percentage of people who apply for asylum and win, at least first round, is less than 17%. So it's not easy to win an asylum, and what you want to do, of course, is have the best case put forward in the first place so that hopefully you don't end up in removal proceedings. Now, there's a way that they won't approve it, but then it just ends, and that's if you're in status. So let's say you come here on a student visa, you go to school, and that 1 year time is coming up. And let's say you have a valid case for asylum. Well, the 1 year case comes up, and you're thinking, oh, I better apply or I'm going to lose it. So you apply, and let's say you still go to school. You still maintain your F1 status. When let's say you lose the asylum. What they'll do is they'll just say thanks, goodbye, and that's that. And then what will happen is you will then go to the, not to the immigration court because you're still in valid F status. So that's sort of a way of trying to apply for asylum if you qualify, and then if you lose, you're still in status and you can either take some other routes or appeal without having to go to removal proceedings. Now, one decent thing about asylum is if you have a valid asylum case, you are not going to accrue unlawful presence days. And if you've seen any of my other videos or been around and heard any immigration law over the last 10-15 years, you know about the waiver of the 3 to 10 year bar and how you accrue unlawful presence days when you run out of status, and all kinds of bad stuff happens. Well, if you have a valid asylum case, no days of unlawful presence accrue. So that ultimately would help should you have to leave the country, and should you see if there's any other grounds of inadmissibility based upon days of unlawful presence. Okay, so that essentially is the affirmative way of applying for asylum. So what we have is, first, if you come to the port of entry and you don't get in the United States, you can do the credible, fair interview manner to apply. Then we have the way of, if there's a year or less that you've been here and you have a valid asylum case, then you can apply affirmatively to the asylum office. And if you lose, of course, they move you to removal proceedings. And then there is the third way, and that is defensive asylum. And that's when you are put into removal proceedings. The removal proceedings themselves are when, let's just say you happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, there's an ICE raid on your work, they ask for ID, you don't have it, boom, you're in removal proceedings. Or you get caught at the border, and rather than them returning you, they put you straight in removal proceedings. Either way, you can then prepare an asylum application and get it filed, and we'll talk about it another time, though. The withholding of removal and Convention Against Torture, you also can apply for those applications as well. So in order to do that, that's when you're put in removal proceedings, you apply for the asylum, and if you win the asylum, then of course you will get lawful permanent residency. You can actually apply for that within 1 year, or after 1 year of being granted asylum. And then the derivatives, being spouse or children who are unmarried and under 21, they can also apply for derivative asylee status if you win asylum. And that's if they're here in the U.S., that's if they're in another country. That's how that works. So if you do win asylum, it's not just for you, it is for your family. So when you're applying, those are the basic ways, by the way, of actually putting forward the asylum application. Now, when you're applying for asylum, there's a few things that you have to keep in mind. And again, I'm going to do a lot more videos on specifics and go into detail on this in the future. But for now, again, just to give a basic idea, I'll just briefly hit on the issues. So first you have to prove nationality, okay? You have to show what country you're applying from, okay, and that you are a national of that country. Obviously, if you're a national of the UK and you're applying for asylum from Guinea, that's not going to work. So you have to be a national of the country that you're applying, or there's some cases where it's known as stateless, where they're stateless. They can't go back anywhere. Nobody will take them. And in that case, it's a little more complicated as to what country you actually argue the asylum from. But that's the first thing. Now, second, of course, you have to prove persecution. Okay? And that's basically defined as the threat to life or freedom of, or infliction or suffering of harm, those that differ in a way that from others and is regarded as offensive. So in persecution, there's a couple ways of doing it, and it's really wide open. Asylum, obviously there's the obvious ones where they're going to kill you because you don't believe in the political system. Okay, that's essentially what a lot of people think asylum and only asylum is, but it's not. Persecution can be in many different forms. I mean, it could be economic, it could be psychological, it could be physical, it could be a combination. It just depends. So the persecution also can be from the past. You could show a past persecution, in which case if you do, then it is assumed and presumed that there will be future persecution until or if it's shown that there's been changed country conditions. Now, you can also prove future persecution without any past persecution. Meaning that if you've been here for some time and it shows something's happened in the country and you see that there could be a chance of future persecution, a reasonable chance, then you can put forward the application as well. Now, permanent or serious injury is not required for persecution, although it can't be, basically that they called you a name that you didn't like and now you're going to apply for asylum. There's a scale basically, and here on this side, for example, would be death, and on this side would be calling you a name, and it's somewhere in between. Okay, that's where the arguments come in for a good asylum case. So you do have to show persecution. There's tons and tons of cases on what is, what's not, what's physical violence, what's real physical violence, where it comes from, and so forth. Stuff dealing with custodial interrogation, rape or sexual assault, forced medical examinations, detention, and so forth, and ones where it's not amounting to persecution. It goes all over the board. And also, as I stated earlier, you can get persecution arising from emotional trauma. Now, harassment by itself is not persecution. So there needs to be more than just mere harassment. There needs to be more than mere discrimination, okay? Except you can show in extraordinary cases that there is persecution based upon the discrimination. But again, it has to be more than just mere discrimination. It is possible to get persecution through economic deprivation. There's various things that you can show in regards to that, although there are ones with economic deprivation where there are no persecution. Again, I'm trying to show that there is a very large amount of case law out there, which some go one way, some go the other way, and it all depends on the facts of the case. I mean, sometimes they can strip your citizenship from the country, and that could be considered persecution. There's a lot of cases where there's conscription and guerrilla organizations. That by itself is not persecution, but you put it together with, possibly your political opinion or something in one of the elements of asylum that you disagree with, and it might lead to a win of asylum. Generally, a civil war, that's not considered per se by itself persecution, but you put it all together, you make a good argument, and then you're able to go from there. Now, there are different ways of showing this, but one thing you have to keep in mind is that if you have obtained residency or citizenship in a third country, you are not eligible for asylum. So that means, let's say you come from some country in Africa where you escaped narrowly with your life, and let's say you went to Australia and got residency in Australia, and now you want to apply for asylum in the U.S. That will not work. Okay, you've received basically safe haven in a third country, therefore you are ineligible for asylum inside the United States. So that you need to keep in mind. Also, as far as persecution, it is possible for a single incident to be persecution if it was severe enough and if you can show that it meets the necessary elements of asylum. Generally, it's not sufficient, but you can show depending on the situation. Now, let's say you take one incident which by itself isn't much, and then you take another incident which by itself is not much. But if you cumulate the total number of incidences, you can show persecution by doing that. Now, you also have to show that the government was unwilling or unable to control the persecutors. And there's different ways of showing that, but that's another element. Obviously, if they're willing to and can control the persecution, then you don't need asylum in the United States because your own government will take care of it. And again, there are different ways of showing that, but you have to make sure that you do show they are unwilling. Now, one thing that you have to show in the meat of the asylum application is that you are persecuted based upon one of 5 different elements, okay? 5 different grounds. And these are the ways you can win asylum or come forward with a ground for asylum. It's race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And again, I could do a whole video just on each one of those and how that applies. But what I do when I do an asylum case is many times it's not just on one area. I might have someone who is both persecuted because of a political opinion, but then also in a membership in a particular social group. And in that case, I go forward with as many elements as I can, because sometimes the judge might not agree with one, but might agree with the other. So you don't want to leave it out. So what you do is you put forward the asylum application with all of these elements, and then hopefully you win. So that is the basics of asylum and the 5 grounds and so forth. If you have an asylum case, or you think you might have one, go ahead and give me a call. I'll be happy to give you a consultation, even if it's past the 1-year issue, because there are ways to get around that 1-year issue and to show that there's extraordinary circumstances leading to that particular result. So we'll do more on the coming videos. Thanks. Have a good day.